You don't need an orchard to grow your own fruit. In fact, one of the biggest mistakes small space gardeners make is planting a fruit tree that was never designed to live in the space they actually have. Here's how it usually goes. Someone falls in love with a beautiful young fruit tree at the nursery, brings it home to a small yard or a patio container, and a few years later discovers the tree wants more root space than the pot allows, more pruning than they expected, or more winter protection than their climate naturally provides. The tree survives, technically, but it never really thrives, and the fruit never really shows up. But there are dwarf fruit trees that genuinely can stay compact, produce real, meaningful fruit, and live happily in a container for years. And one of the trees near the end of this list is probably not the one you'd expect to outperform almost everything else on it. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly which dwarf fruit trees are actually worth your container space, what size pot each one realistically needs, what climate and USDA zone range it tolerates, whether it needs a pollination partner to produce fruit at all, and the specific mistakes that leave gardeners with a beautiful, healthy tree and absolutely no fruit to show for it. This matters right now because the next few months are genuinely one of the better planting windows of the year. Summer heat is starting to ease in most regions. Nurseries are stocking fall planting selections, and cooler weather ahead gives a newly potted tree time to settle its roots before it faces either winter or next year's growing season. At the same time, grocery store fruit prices haven't exactly been a bargain, and more people with patios, balconies, rental homes, and HOA-restricted yards are realizing that a productive garden doesn't require a traditional backyard at all. Tell me your state and your growing zone in the comments, along with which fruit you'd grow first if you could pick it fresh off your own patio. I genuinely want to see how many different climates we end up covering. Before we get into number 12, here's a quick reality check that changes how you should think about this entire list. Nursery labels use words like dwarf, miniature, patio, compact, and standard, almost interchangeably, and they don't always mean the same thing from one type of fruit tree to the next. A dwarf apple and a dwarf citrus are dwarfed through completely different methods, one through rootstock grafting, the other through the plant's own natural growth habit. Knowing the difference is what separates a tree that actually stays container-sized from one that outgrows its pot in 3 years. Let's start the countdown. Number 12. Dwarf apple. Apples are one of the most familiar fruits in the country, and a properly chosen dwarf apple is genuinely one of the more forgiving trees on this list, once you understand a few non-negotiables. Look specifically for trees grafted onto true dwarfing rootstock, commonly labeled M9 or M27, rather than a semi-dwarf tree that will eventually outgrow most containers. In a container in the 15 to 25 gallon range, a true dwarf apple can be kept manageable for years with regular pruning. Apples need full sun, at least 6 hours a day, and most varieties are not self-fertile, meaning you'll need a second, compatible apple variety nearby for reliable pollination. That's one of the biggest mistakes beginners make with this tree, planting a single apple tree in isolation and wondering 2 years later why it flowers beautifully but never sets fruit. Apples also require a certain number of winter chill hours to break dormancy properly, so the specific variety needs to match your regional winters, not just your USDA zone number. In containers, that same cold sensitivity works against the roots, since container roots experience colder temperatures than roots protected by surrounding ground soil. In zones 5 and colder, plan on moving the container somewhere sheltered, like against a house wall or into an unheated garage, for the coldest weeks of winter. Expect a genuine, meaningful harvest around year 3 to 4. This one is best suited to gardeners with the patience for early pruning and the space for 2 trees rather than 1. Number 11. Dwarf pear. Pears share a lot of the same rules as apples, and the same "get the rootstock right" warning applies here even more strongly, since pears in containers benefit enormously from dwarfing quince rootstock rather than standard pear rootstock. A 15 to 20 gallon container works well once the tree is established, in full sun. Like apples, most pear varieties need a second compatible variety nearby for pollination. Though a small number of self-fertile cultivars exist, if space is genuinely limited to one tree. Here's the part that sounds backwards. Pears are actually more tolerant of poorly drained soil than most fruit trees, but in a container, drainage still matters enormously, since standing water in a pot behaves very differently than standing water in open ground. Use a well-draining potting mix and never let the pot sit in a saucer of standing water. Winter protection follows the same container root logic as apples. Expect first meaningful fruit around year 3 to 5, and know upfront that this is a tree for someone planning to stay in one place for a while, not someone looking for a quick payoff. Number 10. Dwarf Apricot. Apricots bring a genuine risk that most beginners don't see coming. They flower extremely early in spring, often before the last frost has passed in a given region, which means a late cold snap can wipe out the entire year's crop, even on a perfectly healthy tree. That's not a reason to skip apricots, it's a reason to grow them in a container in the first place, since a potted apricot can be moved to a sheltered spot or temporarily covered during a late frost, something a tree in open ground can't do. Most apricot varieties are self-fertile, which removes the pollination partner requirement that trips people up with apples and pears. A 15 to 20 gallon container, full sun, and consistent watering during fruit development are the main requirements. Apricots do need a real winter chill period to fruit well, so this isn't the right choice for the mildest, nearly frost-free climates. The biggest mistake here is impatience with pruning. Apricots fruit on one-year-old wood, so incorrect pruning can accidentally remove next year's entire crop. Expect meaningful fruit around year 2 to 3. Number 9. Dwarf Nectarine. Nectarines are essentially fuzz-free peaches, genetically, and they behave almost identically in a container, which makes them a natural pairing with the peach entry coming up shortly. Most nectarine varieties are self-fertile, so a single tree can produce fruit on its own. A 15 to 25 gallon container in full sun works well, and nectarines respond strongly to consistent, deep watering during the weeks when fruit is actually sizing up on the branch. Here's where container growers often get tripped up. More fertilizer does not mean more fruit. Excess nitrogen pushes a nectarine into vigorous leafy growth at the direct expense of flowering and fruit set. A slow-release fruit tree-specific fertilizer, applied lightly in spring, beats a heavy hand with a general all-purpose feed. Nectarines are also somewhat more prone to certain fungal issues than peaches in humid climates, so good airflow around the container and avoiding overhead watering late in the day both help. Expect first real fruit around year 2 to 3, with fuller harvests by year 4 or 5. Number 8. Dwarf Peach. Peaches are one of the most consistently rewarding container fruit trees for beginners, and one of the reasons they show up on nearly every version of this kind of list. Most peach varieties are self-fertile. A 15 to 25 gallon container suits them well, and they want full sun and consistent moisture, particularly as the fruit develops in late spring and early summer. Genetic dwarf peach varieties, specifically bred to stay compact rather than simply pruned smaller, are worth seeking out by name at the nursery, since they hold their size far more reliably in a pot over the long term. Here's a pattern interrupt worth remembering. A bigger container is not automatically better. An oversized pot holds excess moisture around the roots long after the plant needs it, which raises the risk of root rot, particularly in a fruit tree that already prefers well-drained soil. Start appropriately sized and pot up gradually as the tree actually grows into the space. Peaches need a real winter chill period, so extremely mild, frost-free climates aren't a great match unless you choose a specifically low-chill variety bred for that purpose. Expect meaningful fruit around year 2 to 3. Number 7. Dwarf Cherry. Cherries are where container growing genuinely solves a problem that open ground growing doesn't. Full-size sweet cherry trees can reach 20 feet or more, which makes them completely impractical for most home gardeners regardless of yard size, let alone a patio. Dwarf sweet cherry varieties, grown on true dwarfing rootstock, change that equation. But there's a real catch worth knowing before you buy. Many sweet cherry varieties are not self-fertile and require a compatible second variety blooming at the same time for pollination, and some popular varieties aren't even compatible with each other. Read the tag carefully, or better, ask the nursery directly which pairing works. Tart or sour cherries are a simpler answer for a single tree setup, since most tart cherry varieties are self-fertile and naturally stay more compact even without aggressive pruning. A 20 to 25 gallon container, full sun, and well-drained soil suit either type well. Cherries need a genuine chill period and don't tolerate extreme heat during fruit development particularly well, so this one leans toward moderate, temperate climates rather than the deep south or the desert southwest. Expect first real fruit around year 3 to 4. If you're still watching and Small Space Grower is not yet in your subscription list, understand what that actually means. YouTube tracks the channels you follow and uses those signals when deciding what content to surface to you. The moment you leave this video without subscribing, you're making it easier to miss the next practical growing guide. Small Space Grower focuses on realistic gardening for people working with limited space, containers, patios, and real-world growing conditions. Content that helps you grow more with less space goes out from this channel every single week. Hit subscribe. It won't take you many seconds, and you'll know exactly where to come when you're ready to grow something new. Before I reveal number 1, tell me in the comments which fruit on this list you think deserves the top spot. I'll come back to that. Number 6. Dwarf pomegranate. Most beginners focus on the size of the tree. They completely forget about the roots, and pomegranate is a perfect example of why that matters, because it has a naturally compact, shrub-like growth habit that tolerates container life exceptionally well without needing aggressive dwarfing rootstock at all. Pomegranates are self-fertile, want full sun, and are genuinely drought-tolerant once established, which makes them more forgiving of an occasional missed watering than most other trees on this list. A 15 to 20 gallon container works well. The real limitation is cold hardiness. Pomegranates are reliably hardy outdoors year-round, only in roughly zones 8 through 11. In colder zones, the container advantage becomes essential rather than optional, since the entire pot can be moved into an unheated garage or sheltered space for winter, something impossible with a tree planted directly in the ground. Expect meaningful fruit around year 2 to 3, with fruit quality improving as the plant matures over several more years. Number 5. Compact mulberry. Here's the part that sounds backwards about this entry. Mulberry has a reputation as an enormous, messy shade tree, which makes most gardeners assume it has no business in a container. Dwarf and ever-bearing mulberry cultivars completely change that picture. Varieties bred specifically for compact growth stay manageable in a large container, are self-fertile, and in the right climate can produce fruit over an extended season rather than all at once, which is a genuine advantage over most other trees on this list. A 20 to 25 gallon container, full sun to partial shade, and consistent watering suit it well. Mulberries are remarkably adaptable to a wide range of soil conditions and climates, tolerating both real winter cold and considerable summer heat, depending on the specific cultivar chosen. The main mistake here is skipping research on cultivar size entirely and grabbing a seedling-grown mulberry, which can grow far larger and far faster than a named dwarf variety. Expect fruit production to begin within 1 to 2 years, faster than almost anything else on this list. Number 4. Calamondin, a dwarf citrus. Calamondin is one of the most naturally container-friendly citrus varieties that exists, producing small, tart, orange-like fruit prolifically, often even on a fairly young plant. It's self-fertile, so a single tree produces fruit on its own, and it tolerates being kept somewhat root-bound better than many other fruit trees, which actually works in its favor indoors or in a modestly sized 10 to 15-gallon container. It wants as much sun as you can give it, ideally 6 or more hours, and consistent moisture without ever sitting in standing water. The real limitation is cold. Calamondin, like most citrus, is only reliably hardy outdoors year-round, in roughly zones 9 through 11. Everywhere colder, it needs to spend winter indoors near a bright window or under grow lights, which is precisely why it's become one of the most popular container citrus choices for gardeners well outside the traditional citrus belt. Expect the first fruit within 1 to 2 years, which is faster than most trees on this entire list. Number 3. Dwarf blueberry. More water isn't necessarily the answer with this one, and neither is your regular garden soil. Blueberries have a genuinely specific requirement that trips up more container gardeners than almost anything else on this list. They need distinctly acidic soil, typically in the range of pH 4.5 to 5.5, which standard potting mix does not provide on its own. Compact, container-bred blueberry varieties stay naturally small, generally 2 to 4 feet, making them one of the easiest true fruiting plants to fit onto a small patio or balcony. A 10 to 15-gallon container filled with an acidic, well-draining mix, often blended with peat or pine bark, gives them the environment they actually need. While some varieties are partially self-fertile, planting 2 different compatible varieties dramatically improves fruit set and size for nearly every gardener. Blueberries want full sun to partial shade and consistently moist, never soggy soil. Cold hardiness varies significantly by type, with some varieties suited to cold northern winters and others bred specifically for milder southern climates. So matching the specific variety to your region matters more here than with almost anything else on this list. Expect a modest harvest within 1 to 2 years, building to a full harvest by year 3 or 4. Number 2. Dwarf Meyer lemon. Meyer lemon might be the single most recognizable container fruit tree in the entire country, and it earns that reputation. It's self-fertile, meaning one tree produces fruit entirely on its own, and it tends to flower and fruit somewhat continuously through the year, rather than in one short window, which means you're rarely looking at a completely bare tree. A 15 to 20-gallon container, full sun, and consistent watering that never fully dries out between sessions all suit it well. Like Calamondin, it's only reliably hardy outdoors year-round in roughly zones 9 through 11, and everywhere colder, it needs to come indoors for winter, near a bright window. Here's a genuine mistake worth avoiding. Allowing a Meyer lemon to sit in soggy, poorly draining soil is one of the fastest ways to kill it, far faster than underwatering ever will. Check moisture a couple of inches below the surface before watering again, rather than watering on a fixed schedule regardless of conditions. Expect meaningful fruit within 1 to 2 years, and a well-established Meyer lemon in a good-sized container can remain productive for well over a decade with regular repotting and root maintenance every few years. Number 1. Dwarf fig. Here's the reveal, and it's genuinely earned. Fig is arguably the single most forgiving, container-friendly fruit tree on this entire list, and most gardeners don't expect it to outperform citrus and stone fruit, but it does, for a few specific reasons. Figs are self-fertile, and common fig varieties don't require pollination by insects or a second tree at all to set fruit. They tolerate being root-bound in a container far better than almost any other fruit tree, which actually works to a container grower's advantage rather than against it. A 15 to 25-gallon container, full sun, and moderate consistent watering suit most fig varieties well. Here's the detail almost nobody mentions. Many fig varieties are considerably more cold-hardy than people assume, with some cultivars surviving outdoors with protection into roughly zone 6 or 7, and even if the top growth is damaged by an unusually harsh winter, established fig roots frequently resprout vigorously the following spring, something that would kill most other trees on this list outright. The biggest mistake with figs is actually overwatering and over-fertilizing, since excess nitrogen produces lush leafy growth at the expense of fruit, echoing the exact same pattern interrupt lesson from the nectarine entry earlier. Expect the first fruit within 1 to 2 years, often faster than any other tree on this list, with many varieties producing 2 harvests a year, an early summer crop and a second crop in late summer or early fall, in the right climate. If you guessed fig for the top spot in the comments earlier, you called it. If you guessed something else, tell me why, because I'm curious which one you'd have picked instead. The mistakes that actually ruin container fruit production. Before we wrap up, here's a fast rundown of the mistakes that show up across nearly every tree on this list, because avoiding these matters more than which specific fruit you choose. Choosing the wrong cultivar tops the list. A dwarf label on a full-size rootstock tree or a seedling-grown tree with no named variety at all sets you up for disappointment before you've even planted it. Undersized containers restrict root development early, while oversized containers hold excess moisture the roots don't need yet. Both extremes cause problems. Match the container to the tree's actual current size, then pot up gradually. Poor drainage and inconsistent watering are probably the 2 most common killers of container fruit trees combined. Roots that sit in standing water suffocate and rot, while roots that dry out completely and then get flooded again experience repeated stress that weakens the whole plant. Excessive nitrogen fertilizer pushes leafy growth at the expense of flowers and fruit, a pattern that showed up repeatedly throughout this list for a reason. Ignoring pollination requirements leaves gardeners with a healthy, flowering tree and no fruit at all, often for years, before they realize the tree needed a partner variety it never had. Ignoring winter protection is the mistake that doesn't show up until the following spring, when a tree that looked perfectly healthy in fall simply fails to leaf out, because its container roots experienced cold that ground-planted roots never would have. And expecting immediate fruit causes more gardeners to give up than any actual growing mistake. Every tree on this list needs at least a season or 2 to establish before it's ready to put real energy into fruit, instead of root and leaf growth. Bringing it together. You don't need an orchard. You need the right tree, the right container, a climate match that's honest rather than aspirational, and expectations that match how fruit trees actually grow, rather than how fast you'd like them to. Container fruit growing works best when you stop trying to force a full-size orchard tree into a small pot, and instead work with the biology of trees that were genuinely built, through rootstock, breeding, or natural growth habit, to thrive in restricted root space. You get that part right, and a patio, a balcony, or a small suburban yard can produce real, meaningful fruit for years. If you found this valuable, you need to see the next video, where I break down the best vegetables and herbs you can grow in containers when you don't have room for a traditional garden. Before you go, tell me your state, your growing zone, and which fruit from this list you're going to try first. And if you want more practical container growing guides that help you get more from a small space, subscribe to Small Space Grower.